Welcome everyone to another live stream. I'm your host Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting a special coffee tasting, one of my favorites in a very long time. Today we are tasting the Bali Honey Process, and with this coffee, it comes from the Indonesian region of the world, and the island of Bali is just off the east coast of Java. And so with this coffee, we're getting earthy undertones with baking chocolate. So we're gonna get those real bitter chocolates, and then a syrupy sweetness. And so for those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back. It has been a while since my last live stream, but we have plenty of content coming along. We have lots of coffees to try. It is a lot to look forward to. And so, for those of you who have not joined me for a live stream before, I like to try my coffee three different ways. That way, we get to fully explore the different flavor notes of the coffee has to offer through the different brewing methods. So, right over here, we have our standard pour over, the Melita Benz pour over, and then we have our Chemex, which is a triple paper filter. So, we're going to filter out some more of the sediments and oils. And then we have the French press, where we're going to maximize those flavors and really taste everything and get all those sediments. So let's go ahead and get this coffee tasting started. So there has been a little bit of a drought of content on my channel just from the lack of new coffees that have been coming out, and then just how busy I've been outside of the coffee world. So we are finally getting back into doing coffee tastings again. So thank you everyone for joining me. It is something that I'm really looking forward to getting back into doing. So the reason why I brew my coffee three different ways is because each different brew method is going to give us different flavor notes. And so with the paper filter, we're going to get a little bit of those sediments and we're going to filter out some more of those oils. But because the paper filter can't filter out all the oils, some of the oils gets pushed through, and so we're going to end up with a oil heavy coffee, and that's going to impact the brighter notes of the coffee. So we're going to end up with like more of the more citrusy notes or the bright spice notes in the pour over. But with the Chemex, since we have that triple paper filter, we're actually going to filter out some more of those oils out of the coffee. And so we're going to even up those oils with the sediments that are being filtered out, allowing us to taste more of the bitter tones of the coffee. And so with the Chemex, we're going to taste a little bit more of the earthy notes. And so that's why I really like to explore the different coffees. Most of the time when I drink my coffee, I tend to go for the French press just because I like more of the bitter chocolate notes or the earthy notes from the coffee. And to maximize that, I use the French press. But if I were to choose a different method, I would go for the Chemex. And the reason why I go for the Chemex is just because it kind of tones down some of those bright citrusy notes or the bright floral notes that you would get in some coffees. And I'm not a big fan of the citrusy notes or floral notes. So by cutting back on the oils, we're going to tone that flavor down. And that's just my personal uh, brew method or flavor opinion. And so everyone's going to like their coffee brewed a different way because everyone likes different flavor notes out of their coffee. And so it's really important for us as coffee drinkers, if you really love coffee, to just explore like different brew methods, and then different blends of coffee from around the world so that you could really find that coffee that you really like so you can really enjoy your cup of coffee in the morning. And then if it's It could also be like for me, the most enjoyment that I get out of coffee is just by exploring different parts of the world through the flavors of coffee. And then so just by having all these different coffees available to me is just allowing me to fulfill that satisfaction for me. And then also at the same time, because I'm exploring all these different coffees from around the world, I'm really experiencing some exotic flavors. Some I don't necessarily like. They're very interesting, and what's nice is the fact that they're so different. Is nice because sometimes when you drink coffee and you try a different coffee, it almost always tastes the same. Especially when you get like different brands but from the same region of the world, you can hardly tell the difference. But with these coffees, you got like some of them taste like they have like almost pepper added to it. Some have like almost like a super bright melon flavor. And so the flavors that we're getting from these different coffees from around the world in their small lot um, vastly differs the flavor of the coffee that we're getting. And so that's what makes this coffee so special, um, is the fact that the flavors are so different that you don't need to be a coffee connoisseur to be able to tell that you're tasting a coffee you haven't tried before. And so for me, my favorite brew process is going to be the French press, and my secondary brew process is going to be the Chemex. But then it also determines on whether or not I'm brewing from a specific region as well. So if I'm brewing from like a Latin American region and we're getting like some heavy chocolate notes, I'm definitely going to want to choose the French press to maximize those bitter chocolate notes. But if I'm doing like something like maybe from like an African region where it's got like heavy citrus notes and some chocolate notes, then I want to use the Chemex to kind of die down those citrusy notes to better experience some of those chocolate notes that are supposed to be offered. All right, so we're gonna start off the coffee tasting with the French press. So with the French press, we're getting more sediments and more oils. So we're gonna get a more full-bodied cup of coffee, more flavor, more intensity. It doesn't necessarily have more caffeine. There's just gonna be more substance to it. And then also the serving might be greater as well. So this might be 2 cups of coffee, while the pour over might be 1 cup of coffee. And so it's just all about proportions. You could share a French press between 2 people, and then you just essentially have a single serving for each person. And so when you think about like a French press having more coffee, it doesn't necessarily have more caffeine. It's just the portions are larger because of the French press size. So right off the bat, just from the aroma, I'm getting like that sweet, earthy undertone. I'm not getting a whole lot of that baking chocolate aroma coming off of it, but definitely that sweet, earthy notes. And that's really good. Very, very smooth. So we're getting like immediately off the bat, we're getting a really, really smooth, sweet, bitter notes in the center of the tongue, and then like a very, very light, bright. It's almost like a fruity flavor. That's going to be like the syrupy sweetness on the sides of the tongue. It almost has similar qualities to this other honey process coffee that I've tried that has really strong melon notes. This one tastes almost like that, but the melon notes or that fruity flavor isn't as predominant as the other coffee that I'm talking about. And so this is really good, really smooth. I like it on the French press. It's not as intense as I was hoping it would be on the French press, but still really good. Normally, when you drink from a French press, you're anticipating like some really bold, intense, bitter flavors. This is surprisingly smooth coming from the French press. Now we're going to try the Chemex. With the Chemex, we have that triple paper filter. With the triple paper filter, we're filtering out more of the oils that would normally pass through in a regular paper filter. And so we're going to end up with a smoother, cleaner cup of coffee, and it's going to impact the flavor as well. And so we just went from the most intense brew, and now we're going to try the lightest brew of the three. So immediately right off the bat, from the aroma, I'm not getting as much of that sweet earthy aroma that I was getting from the French press. I'm getting more of like the bitter notes. So I'm getting more of those baking chocolate notes coming off the coffee. It smells much darker. And the only reason why it smells much darker is because so much of the oils were filtered out in the Chemex that we're not getting as much of those bright notes coming from the oils. Oh yeah. So the flavor profile is much different. We're getting much more of those bitter chocolate notes on the center of the tongue. And then we're not getting that much light sweetness on the sides. There is a subtle bit sweetness, but it doesn't nearly taste as fruity as it did before. And that's just like I said, we're filtering out some more of those oils. And so we're not getting that bright flavor that we would normally get in like a French press or a normal pour over. And so it's going to vastly impact the flavor of our coffee. And so just immediately right off the bat, I can tell you that I prefer the Chemex over the French press, just because we're eliminating more of that fruity flavor, and that fruity brightness coming from the French press is so subtle. You almost want to be able to tell that it's there if you don't drink a lot of coffee. But for me, I can tell that it's there, so I would prefer the Chemex just because I can taste that subtle brightness coming from the coffee. But it's still so subtle that I still like it. This is a really good cup of coffee. It's if I were drinking the other honey process, the Bolivia Sol de la Mañana honey process, I would definitely stray away from the Chemex or the French press because the melon notes are so predominant that it's just not favorable for me. That's not my it's not my cup of coffee. All right, so now we're trying the pour over. With the pour over, it's just the standard Melita Benz standard pour over single paper filter. And so with this, we're filtering out the sediments, but we're letting some of the oils pass through. And so what happens is when the paper filter starts to absorb some of uh, the oils that are originally absorbed in the paper filter get pushed through by the next set of oil being absorbed by the paper filter. And so not all the oil gets absorbed or held back by the paper filter like you would see in like the Chemex, where most of the oil is held back by the triple paper filter. So with this, because we're filtering out the sediments but allowing some of the oil to pass through, we're going to get a brighter cup of coffee. We're going to taste a little bit more of those bright notes that I was talking about in the French press. And so, just by the aroma of the coffee, I can already tell you that it's not nearly as dark as the Chemex. You can smell the bright, sweet, earthy undertone notes that you could in the French press. That's really smooth. So that's really good. This one is a really good, um, well-rounded pour-over coffee. We're getting a lot of those baking chocolate notes, and we're getting that sweet, earthy undertones and syrupy sweetness on the sides of our tongue at the same time. It's all coming in the same wave, so it's not like you taste one flavor first and then the other flavor second. It's all coming together in one flavor, which is really nice. It makes it a little harder to discern the different flavors. But what's nice is because it's all coming together, it makes for a really balanced cup of coffee. So this is a really nice pour over flavor cup of coffee for the Bali Honey Process. There is a little bit of a dry mouth earthiness that lingers on afterwards. And so if you're looking for a cleaner cup of coffee or want to avoid that the dryness effect of the coffee, then I would go for the Chemex. But if you're looking for just pure flavor, this is a great cup of coffee. The just the standard Melita Benz pour over for the Bali Honey Process. That is really, really good. All right. Excellent, you guys. So for me, if I were to choose a favorite brew method for this particular cup of coffee, I would probably choose the Chemex just because we do still get more of those smoother chocolate notes, and then we don't get that dry mouth uh, effect that you get from the as your palate starts to clear. So like right now, I have a little bit of a dry palate, and so that's just a little bit of an unpleasant feeling while drinking your coffee. And so that's why you would want to pair like something savory with this cup of coffee if you do a standard pour over. So like maybe like a something with bacon or cheese, just to help make your palate salivate and get rid of that dry mouth feeling. But that's all about pairing coffees with different types of food and pastries and stuff like that. Um, so if you're looking for something you don't have to pair any coffee food with, I would either go with the French press or the Chemex. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about Bali and where and how it got its coffee. And so the interesting thing with Bali honey or Bali itself is it got its coffee different from the rest of the Indonesian region of the world. So most of coffee from the Indonesian part of the world, like Sumatra and Java, have a really strong Dutch influence when the Dutch started colonizing different islands for farmland in the early 1700s. They brought coffee with them from India and started growing coffee in West Java and northwest Sumatra, and so this particular coffee, Balinese coffee, is actually not related to Dutch colonialism. It actually started growing coffee from the Lombok Trading Company coffee company in the early 20th century, and so it doesn't have a history with the Dutch colonialism, and that's actually a nice thing because the Dutch colonialism doesn't have a great history. The people of Sumatra have come out of a lot of poverty through colonial rule, especially in terms of being choked for their money, in terms of like the money that they make from exports and the food and other things that they were exporting at the time of Dutch colonialism. And then shortly after Dutch colonialism, you had a civil war that was influenced by Dutch politics, and the people fought against each other. But what's nice is now they're free of Dutch rule, um, and they make much more money and contribute much more to their society because uh, uh, that's not a thing anymore. But what's nice is Balinese is completely free of that kind of past and history, and it is all about sustainable farming and organic growing. So they're not organic certified, but they do partner up with local farmers in the area to acquire uh, organic fertilizer to grow their coffee ethically, and then also reduce their carbon footprint down to zero. And then also what's nice as well is it's grown on the side of a volcano on this or volcanic soil on the sides of a mountain called uh, mountainside fincas, or what's also known as farms. And so that's what they call it, mountainside fincas. And that's where they grow their coffee. And another thing about Bali coffee is it's revered amongst the coffee drinkers of Japan. So this is like a gourmet coffee that you would be drinking if you were in Japan. And this coffee is also different from the normal Bali coffee that would be like semi-washed. This is a honey process, and so with the honey process, we go into a different process of making this coffee, which makes this coffee even more special because there's a little bit more work going into making this coffee happen. And so with this, the honey process, they leave the parchment layer on the bean when they dry. And when it dries, it turns a honey brown. And so that's where it gets its name, the honey process. And so when that parchment layer surrounding the bean turns this honey brown color, it's creating natural sugars, kind of like a browning apple does or a banana. And with these natural sugars, we're getting that slightly sweet flavor. And so like those sweet earthy undertones or those that almost bright fruity flavor that I'm getting from the coffee, that's actually coming from the honey process that's being done to this coffee. And what's interesting is the flavor notes that we're getting from this particular blend of coffee is different than the normal traits of Bali coffee. And the only reason why it's so different than the normal flavor notes that you would get from Bali is because the fact that we did the honey process and we completely changed the flavor notes of the coffee by bringing that semi-sweet flavor to it and helping bring out those chocolate notes. And so that's what makes Bali processed coffees so the honey process so good and so important is the different process that goes into it, all that much more work, and it's so good that it is a gourmet coffee to many drinkers in the country of Japan. So thank you everyone for joining me for another coffee tasting. Many more to come. We've got a small little preview of all the different coffees we'll be trying here in the future right on this table. So if you guys have not hit that subscribe button or the like button, please do so down below. It really helps this channel get that much more views. And the more views that we get, the more opportunities that we have to make more, better, and greater videos. Maybe even explore the world, to maybe even meet the farmers and really show our respects in the work that they do to make this coffee happen and make it to our table. Because so much work goes into making just a normal bag of coffee, and then there's so much extra work in making a honey processed bag of coffee. And that's important to know so that we can truly appreciate what's in our hand. Thank you everyone for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Join me next time. Have a great day.